Hello everyone and welcome again to my How To Education channel. As I promised you last week, today we're gonna continue with the second part of How to Ace Economics, Demand, Supply and Market Equilibrium. After watching this video, don't forget to give me your feedback. After going over demand and quantity demanded last week, let's now start with an introduction to the concepts of supply and of quantity supplied. Supply is an economic concept that refers to the total amount of goods or services available for sale in the market. It is affected by a series of factors that will be discussed later throughout the chapter. Quantity supplied is the number of units of a product or service that a supplier or a company is willing and able to offer for sale in a specific period of time and at a particular price. Quantity supplied is affected solely by the price of that specific good or service. A supply schedule shows how much of a given product or service firms are willing to sell at different prices for a given time period. A supply curve is a graphical representation of how much of a product a firm will sell at different prices. The following table describes a supply schedule. Suppliers were able to produce no units when the price was $1. They were able to produce 5,000 units when the price was $2.5. They were able to produce 10,000 units when the price was $4.5. 15,000 units when the price was $7.5, 20,000 units when the price was $12, and lastly, when the price was $20, they were able to produce the most, 25,000 units. The graph aside shows a supply curve built based on the supply schedule. Note that the quantity supplied lies in the x-axis and the price lies in the y-axis. Another very important economic concept is the law of supply, which was portrayed in the previous graph. It states that, as the price of a good or service rises, the quantity supplied by the producer increases, and as the price falls, the quantity supplied by the producer decreases. That is, producers are more motivated to supply goods that have a higher prices. Thus, a positive relationship exists between price and quantity supplied. This explains why the previous graph of the supply curve had a positive slope. The slope of a supply curve will always be positive. It is important to differentiate between the factors affecting supply and the factors affecting quantity supplied. The supply of a good or service is affected by factors such as costs, input prices, technology, or prices of related goods and services. The quantity supplied is affected by the price of the product or service itself. That is, an increase in the price of good X will most certainly cause an increase in the quantity of good X supplied. However, an increase in the technology available, for example, will cause an increase in the supply of good X. When the price of a good changes, causing therefore a change in quantity supplied, we say that we have a movement along the supply curve. Let's say, for example, that price changes from $4.5 to $7.5. Then, quantity supplied will change from 10,000 to 15,000 units. But the 2 points continue to be on the same supply curve. That's why we call it a movement along the supply curve. Sometimes the price of a good stays the same, but other factors cause the supply to change, as for example, a change in costs of production or in input prices, an improvement or decline in technology, or an increase or decrease in prices of related goods and services. Such factors and all others that cause a change in supply when the price stays the same will cause a shift in the supply curve. We call it a change in supply. Thus, when the quantity supplied changes without a change in price, We call it a shift in the supply curve or a change in supply. The first graph aside shows an outward shift of the supply curve from S0 to S1. That means that supply increased and the supply curve is shifting to the right. The second figure shows an inward shift from S0 to S1, which means that supply decreases and supply curve is shifted to the left. The following supply schedule clearly shows the concept of a shift of the supply curve. That is, quantity supplied is changing from quantity supplied 1 to quantity supplied 2, but price is staying the same. When the quantity supplied changes while price stays the same, we have a shift of the supply curve and an increase or decrease in supply. For the following case, quantity supplied 2 is always greater than quantity supplied 1. Thus, figure 1, which is the rightward shift, is what portrays this situation. This is the reference website from which I got the picture aside to depict a rightward or a leftward shift of the supply curve. As the price of a good or service rises, in most cases, suppliers will be willing and able to produce more of this good or service. Thus, the quantity supplied by the producer increases. As the price of a good or service falls, in most cases, suppliers will be less willing and less able to produce this good or service. Thus, the quantity supplied by the producer decreases. Both of these situations cause a movement along the supply curve. When speaking about supply, goods or services can be related to each other in 3 different ways. First of all, they can be substitutes. That is, these 2 or more goods serve the same purpose to the consumer. For example, Coke and Pepsi, coffee and tea, pizza and burger. Let's use the example of pizza and burger. If the price of pizza increases, the producers of pizza will most likely be willing and able to produce more of it. Thus, its quantity supplied will increase, and we're going to have an upward movement along the supply curve. With the increase in the quantity of pizza supplied, suppliers will tend to shift to the production of pizza and forget about burgers. Thus, the supply of burgers will decrease even if its price stays the same. This is depicted by a shift of the supply curve of burgers to the left. They can also be complementary. That is, these 2 or more goods are used together, so the supply of one is linked to the supply of the other. For example, laptop and laptop chargers, printer and ink cartridges, movies and popcorn. Let's use the example of laptop and laptop chargers. If the price of laptop increases, the suppliers of laptop will most likely be willing and able to produce more of it. Thus, its quantity supplied will increase, and we're going to have an upward movement along the supply curve. With the increase in quantity of laptops supplied, suppliers will also need to produce more laptop chargers. Thus, the supply of laptop chargers will increase even if the price stays the same. This is depicted by a shift of the supply curve of laptop chargers to the right. Lastly, one of these goods can be an input in the production process of the other. For example, wood and wood tables, papers and textbooks, workers and wood tables. Let's use the example of workers or wood and wood tables. If the price of wood increases or the price of workers, as in their salary, increases, it would be more costly for the suppliers to supply wood tables. They would be less willing and less able to do so. Thus, the supply of wood tables will decrease, and the supply curve of wood tables will shift to the left. Therefore, when the price of an input increases, the supply of the good or service will decrease and its supply curve will shift to the left. In order to supply goods and services on time, producers need certain types of technology to be available. When the price of any of these technological devices decreases, or the quantity of any of these technological devices increases, producers will be able and willing to supply more of the good or service. Thus, the supply of these goods or services will increase and their supply curves will shift to the right. When the price of any of these technological devices increases, or the quantity of any of these technological devices decreases, producers might not be able to supply the good or service. Thus, the supply of these goods or services will decrease and their supply curves will shift to the left. In order to supply goods and services on time, producers also need to incur certain costs of production, as for example salaries, machines, land, prices of raw materials, and so on. When these costs decrease, producers will be able and willing to supply more of the good or service. Thus, the supply of these goods will increase and their supply curves will shift to the right. When these costs increase, producers might not be able to supply the good or service. Thus, the supply of these goods or service will decrease and their supply curve will shift to the left. When the quantity supplied by the producer is equal to the quantity demanded by the consumer, we say that the market is at equilibrium. I will be speaking about market equilibrium, excess supply and excess demand in the third part of this lecture next week. We will also be doing some economics exercises. This is it from economics for this week, but if you have reached the end of this video, it is because the content is helpful to you somehow. If this is the case, then please give your friends and acquaintances the opportunity to have access to these videos by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing to this channel. We will be continuing with the last part of this lecture next Wednesday. But before that, I will see you all on Saturday with some finance content. Thank you so much.